Well, my dear friends, the time has come. We're now just hours away from the Andor series premiere, episodes 1, 2 and 3 on Disney+. Now, just as I've done with every other show, today we're going to be discussing what to expect, what recent critics have said, and we've also got some Easter eggs from new footage, as well as some comments from the cast and crew, a preview if you will. So without much further ado, and without any more jibber jabber, let's dive straight into it. Now, right off the bat, let's talk about this 3-episode premiere. The consensus amongst the majority of early reviewers has been that 3 episodes function as one long episode, and related to this, another common thing that we've heard is that episode 3 is by far the best episode of the first few, and while the first 2 move at a very slow pace, episode 3 is the payoff. Apparently, the 3rd episode is designed to make you crave episode 4 with an ending that teases you for what's to come later in the show, and these 3-episode increments are going to be common throughout the show's 2 seasons, and in essence, they function as arcs, kind of like in the Clone Wars. The first arc that we're getting tomorrow is about setting the tone for the series and easing us into it. We're meeting a Cassian who's still struggling to find his way in the galaxy, a galaxy that is very unforgiving. He's lost his homeworld to the Empire, his relationship to Bix is shambolic, and his own mother is disappointed with how his life is going. Now, speaking of tone and general vibe, Tony Gilroy has reiterated time and time again that Andor is not your typical Star Wars project. One reviewer described it as, quote, having the audacity to stand on its own, all the while reminding you throughout that it is fundamentally a Star Wars series. It takes your hand through a refreshingly divergent part of the Star Wars galaxy, and before we start worrying about subversion of expectations, this show works perfectly as a prequel to A New Hope and Rogue One, and while it does introduce very new concepts, a grittier tone and a much darker feel, at its core, it is still in line with what you want for a Star Wars show. And the word satisfying came up about 6 times amongst the recent reviews, and so it's reassuring to know they found a balance with this one. Now, one thing I've had the honour of hearing for myself is the main theme for the Andor show, and I've got to tell you, Nicholas Brittle did a phenomenal job with his soundtrack, and I should also remind you that the theme changes slightly with every episode to represent and reflect the themes of that particular episode, so each time it's a slightly different variation, at least that's what they told us. And speaking of the music of this series, a big worry that some fans had going into it was what the soundtrack would be like, especially without Michael Giacchino. His Rogue One score is one of the most iconic of the Disney Star Wars era, and so there were big shoes to fill when it came to who would compose for Andor, but Nicholas Brittle did a wonderful job, and as we saw in some of the promo footage put out at D23, the orchestra, or at least parts of it, were playing on set. This is not a common thing with TV shows, especially not in Star Wars. Typically, the music production is completely separate, but the actors in this case were given the rare opportunity to actually hear the soundtrack in real time, and I suppose in a way, they could advantageously get a sense of the vibe of certain scenes. You know, usually it's only when the show is out that the actors can look at the finished product, but in this case, they had the music right there. The atmosphere must have been awesome. Something else we heard in some of the early reviews was the cinematic element of it. Those who were lucky enough to have gone to the red carpet event would have experienced the first 3 episodes as one long movie in a cinematic setting, and some of the folks who came out of the viewing said it should have been released as a movie because the scope is so huge. Now, we already knew this based on the trailers, and when Tony Gilroy came out and said they barely used the volume at all, we already knew that this show was going to look magnificent and authentic to what we envision these landscapes and planets to be like in our imaginations. The Andor series takes us there, and I can't wait to see it and experience it. As I say guys, tomorrow I will be doing my full review and breakdown. Now, over the last few hours, a number of TV spots for the Andor series dropped, some containing new footage, and in one frame of Luthen Rail and his antique shop, we see the mask of Jedi Master Plo Koon, although it could be from a random Keldor. Star Wars fans on social media understandably went absolutely ballistic. It's so exciting, and it also proves something I've been saying right from the start, that Tony Gilroy is playing coy. There are tons of Easter eggs throughout this show, and while you might not call it fanservice, it certainly sparks debate and conversation in the fandom. Notably with this piece, Plo Koon's mask, we must wonder how he attained it. In Revenge of the Sith, Plo Koon is struck down during Order 66 over Cato Neimoidia. If this is his mask in the Andor show, then it means someone on Cato Neimoidia found it amongst the debris and realised its worth and what it was, so they sold it onto the black market. Now in Legends, a lot of Jedi relics were sold this way, including on Coruscant with Mace Windu's lightsaber. And bear in mind, my dear friends, this is just an Easter egg. It probably has nothing to do with the plot itself. If you think back a couple of months ago, there are other pieces in this shop that are major Easter eggs. And so now guys, on the news side of things, we do have an update for Andor Season 2. It's not very surprising, but good confirmation nonetheless. Andor Season 2 is likely not going to be released before 2024. While talking to the Wrap about the new show, Gilroy said that his work on Andor is really sticking around, considering they still have to produce and release Andor Season 2. In his own words, he says, "I have 2 more years to go. We'll shoot from November," and he means November of this year, to August of next year, and then our post-production last time was about a year. And that probably means, at the earliest, we can expect Andor Season 2, or Part 2, as Tony Gilroy calls it, in fall of 2024. But don't worry guys, next year is loaded with Star Wars projects: The Mandalorian Season 3, Ahsoka, Skeleton Crew, The Bad Batch Season 2, and Vision Season 2 as well. And if Andor Part 2 is anything like the first 12 episodes, then it's probably going to be well worth the wait. And in other Andor news, we have some more really interesting comments from Tony Gilroy, but this time with the Rolling Stone. He acknowledges that in the Andor series, they do acknowledge in a tasteful way the existence of sex work. They say it's a big contrast to the same galaxy that spawned Jar Jar Binks, Ewoks, and Grogu, giving us a different perspective on the Empire-Rebellion conflict. And in this interview, Tony Gilroy remembers the first time he handed in the first episode for Disney's approval, and they said, "Whoa, so this is what the first show is going to be like. It was a marker, but it's also good for the story." He said, quote, "It served double duty." The larger aim of the Andor show is to give us the birth of a rebellion, a revolt that barely exists when the show's narrative begins. The stories and characters are meant to be ground level, even a plot twist early on where a character calls the Imperial cops on Andor because of romantic jealousy, and for him, he said it felt like fresh territory for Star Wars. He says, quote, "This is the most grounded that Star Wars will ever get." Diego Luna added, "We are stressing that change and revolution happens when regular people decide to do something. And the show is just regular people trying to survive in the darkest time in this galaxy and finding out they can't take it anymore. It is about a system that is choking society." And just another reminder guys, this show is very political, and Gilroy says there was no time for Jedi in this story. Once the show gets going about halfway through, it really is non-stop fast-paced from there on out. In other words, the intensity of the show grows as the show goes on. I'm super excited guys, and I hope you are too. As I mentioned, tomorrow I will be doing my full episode breakdown and review. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below guys. How are you feeling about Andor just one day out? And what is one thing about this series you're most looking forward to? Maybe from what you've heard from the cast and crew, previous videos, rumours, the trailers, and so on. Name that one thing in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, as always, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, find me on Twitter at StarWarsMeg1, and I'll see you in the next video. May the Force be with you always. I'm Star Wars Meg, have a good one.